I didn't actually expect we would be talking about this, but hey, there we go. I picked up a buggy just recently, actually. It arrived, what was it, Monday? Finally had a chance to put it together. So I picked up one. Do I have a box here? Yeah, here we go. Picked up one the Mini Z VE buggies, so the brushless FHSS 2.4 gigahertz, which is kind of funny because I don't actually run FHSS anymore. So I actually had to pull out one of my old controllers, the Synchro Touch, which was interesting. Now it comes with a clear body, but I actually picked up the Ultima mid body. I'm quite a big fan of the original Optima body. The Mini Z buggy, I think, was actually the second Mini Z I actually purchased. And I didn't quite get into it. There's actually a whole lot of issues with the Mini Z buggy chassis, which I'll get into. In fact, I've got my original one here, which I've just been pulling apart for parts. So you can see I've got a lot of aluminium parts. I've got the big bore shocks. I've got a second set of big shore shocks here, which I think we might put on while I'm talking in a minute. And I'm very, very tempted to convert these from oil over to grease, just because all the mini buggy shocks leak, which is one of the really, really, really bad things about them. The other thing that's really, really annoying about them is they don't center or track very well. And I actually put the diffs in here, the buggy diffs, and I was actually having a big problem with spin out as well. So I've obviously got some resistance on one wheel more than the other. I think it's that wheel and that wheel. So when it takes off, it veers to the left. Sometimes the gyro catches it, sometimes it doesn't. And when I brake, it does a hard left spin. And that's next to impossible to counter. So I'll have to look more into that. But while we're doing that, let's start swapping these shocks over. So as I said, I really did like the buggies. I did want to get into carpet racing. One of the other annoying things about the buggies themselves is they don't turn very well. There's actually not much steering angle on them. So driving them in a tight apartment is actually fairly difficult. Do I have my micro nippers around? We'll just use those. Now I'm running these on lithium ion, and this is an 85,000 kV motor, which is more than enough. In fact, I'm very, very tempted to go back down to like a 45,000 kV, or maybe a 55,000 if I've got one handy. Oh, how's that one going to work? Okay, I'm going to have to pull out a screwdriver on this. So it was interesting because I've done a bit of a re-release of the buggy. And it's not a real re-release, it's more of they've got new shocks, big bore shocks in gold, which I deliberately didn't get because they're like twice the price of the red ones, and I've got red anodization on it. And they're sort of, I don't know if they're trying to get behind the buggies or and revive them or what they're doing, but I really, really hope that there's going to be a second version. So this is actually version 2.0 of the electronics. And that's... The upgrade in electronics is definitely worth it, although the electronics on this is split into two. So you've got your receiver electronics, and the 2.0 are just FHSS, and then you've got your ESC. And there's actually a cable. Actually, I'll pull the top off here and show you. There's a little cable between the two electronic parts here. So this one originally was a brushed MB-010, and this is one of the VE Pro versions. But the VE Pro 2.0, so in FHSS rather than ASF. But I actually got the electronics separately and did an electronic swap on this one to make it a bit better. And this has also got the fiberglass chassis and a whole bunch of other hidden upgrades on it, which I'm not sure if I'll translate across. The buggy is actually incredibly difficult to work on and pull apart. This back section has a lot of overlapping pieces that end up being very, very complex to put together and pull apart. So as much as I'd love to use a fiberglass chassis because it's tougher and noticeably stiffer, I don't think it's worth the effort in pulling it apart. I've also got the metal servo arm, or the metal servo saver, which is definitely worth it. Because unlike so many pieces on this, it's Actually, I can probably show it there. So if I do that, look at how much wobble there is in those. And that's with after adding aluminium parts that really line these up. So the plastic ones, if you hold the wheel hub here and twist the wheel like that, it bends all over the place. The metal, not so much, everything's dead straight. But the problem is the servo arms, or the linkages here, have so much play in them, as you can see there, that there's no dead straight. So I'm forever trying to trim up the vehicle, even though technically it can't be true on its trim. So whether or not it goes left or right depends on if your previous turn was left or right, which makes for a lot of fun. The other funny thing is, going back to FHSS, everything is just so sluggish. So I was watching Geo Stealther today, and he misunderstood my comment. I commented on his use of the Synchro Touch, and I couldn't believe he was using that, because after being with the low latency on the MB-010, going back to FHSS, and the delay on the input is just mind-blowing. I'll probably get used to it, but the chassis itself is definitely not helping. One of the other big problems with this chassis as well is that there's not a lot of, well, there's a lot of upgrade parts, but a lot of them you can't get anymore. So some of the parts seem to be available again. So I got the PN Racing sway arms that go here and here for my camera will focus. In fact, I can fix that because I can just fix the focus on that. Yes, ignore that error. Exposure, focus auto, disable, update 30, and we'll bump you down to 20. There we go. Perfect. So I've got the swing arms there, and on the back. In fact, you only really need dog bones on the back, but it was easy enough just to go full swing arm on that. But yeah, so those weren't previously available, and now they are. Before you could only get the Kyosho ones, and now I think the Kyosho ones are unavailable, and the PN Racing ones are available. So when I originally built my buggy, it was very hard to get some parts. The motors on these overheat like crazy, so there is a heatsink part that integrates into that. But good luck trying to find one. I spent a good solid 6 months on every single site you can imagine, every single Google search you can imagine, trying to find one. They just do not exist. But that said, the buggy is actually pretty sensitive to weight. You can see all the dirt from racing downstairs. Yeah, that's still bottoming out too much, so we need to put some spacers on there. And like, look at them. So these are the, actually, are these the official mounts? Maybe they're not the official mounts. I might need to fix that then. There's quite a bit of play on the front there, but it probably doesn't matter as much. I just noticed with the previous shocks that these were sitting very low. I'd like to say that there's a point to this entire video, but there's not. I just went downstairs and had some fun and decided I wanted to talk about the buggy. And because I'm on holidays now, I'm going to talk about whatever I feel like at the moment. So bear with me. So we're just going to put some of the big spacers on and just see how that goes. Filling these with oil was also a big chore. So the big bore shocks, it's very hard to get reproducible results. I almost need a syringe where I can measure off the oil and do it that way. So let's see. Oh, that's interesting. Why is that only compressing on one side? Maybe that's half my problem. One side's loose and one side is incredibly stiff. Alright, keep on talking. Yeah, so what makes the buggy good? The titanium shafts here, if you can get the replacements for that. You'll see I've got the titanium shafts in gold here, there. So if you do that, you do need the red piece on the front here, which adds weight. So it's not, you have to make a trade-off between weight and just how loose the suspension is. But it does make a noticeable difference in smoothing up the suspension. So why is that? That's looking a bit better now. But it's still really, really stiff. Okay, we can replace that one then. That might go on the back. Wrench and torque, I guess. That did seem fluid and smooth, so... yeah, so getting reproducible results with these oil-filled ones is incredible. And then there's a whole lot of other issues in that if there's even the slightest bit of grease on this, or oil, you can't actually tighten them up. So I was using several tools. Do I have them handy? Here we go, the Tamiya plastic-covered pliers to actually grip the body. And I do have some specialized shock building tools for 1/10 scale that actually work on the big bore shocks. So that's a plus, definitely recommend that. But as I said, I'm actually thinking about going for grease-filled shocks because it's a royal pain to get the values correct, and it's significantly easier if you're using oil-filled shocks. So I do have 2 sets of big bore shocks, and I'll be playing around to see how that goes. But when I'm talking about it's hard to get accurate or hard to get reproducible, I had one shock that would, once it tightened up, fully extend under its own. So, wait, I'll just screw this in, then I'll show you. Showing is better. So you'd take it wouldn't have the spring on, but you'd compress it, and under its own power would just come out. So there was high pressure inside the damping tube, and it was forcing the cylinder out. The other ones would come out just a couple of mils, and other ones would not move at all. And so there's a very, very weird, I guess you'd call calibration process I developed to bleed out 1/2 mil of oil at a time to try and fix things. Oh, I should also mention, if you do get a buggy, these shocks are not oil filled out of the box. You actually do have to take them off the vehicle, fill them up with oil the first time. So this feels like maybe the binding's actually in the steering setup rather than suspension. That might explain a couple of things. It was actually funny because I took out the WL Toys one for... no, the other one. The longer wheelbase one. Oh wow, okay, it's actually binding in something on there. So I'm just going to loosen that up. If I can find an appropriate tool. And took it like a full 1/16 scale buggy out for a blast before I took this out for a blast. And funnily enough, this didn't run out of battery power. And funnily enough, I shouldn't have expected this to run out of battery power because this lasts around on AA's or AAA's. What ran out of power was the transmitter. So they're just charging up. Batteries are charging up now, and that's why I'm here chatting about this in the interim. Okay. Okay, so I'm pretty sure if that one's really, really loose, that would explain why this tire was tightening up and scrolling in like that. So there are a couple of metal upgrades I do recommend. The metal parts here and here, because the plastic that goes there is actually incredibly flexible. And you don't want it flexing when you're jumping or steering. I do recommend the shocks. I do recommend the steering knuckles and the wheel holders on the back. You can see that I've got the arms in metal here. Honestly, I don't know if they're actually worth it. So they're very, very heavy, and I don't feel that they. I haven't broken one yet. There are parts on this car that break, but as far as I'm aware, those don't. But I've got a couple of these chassis now that I can steal parts from, so... Why is that binding up? I actually don't know where this is binding up, which is even worse. I suspect it might be this metal bar here and that swing arm on the right. Okay, so it's going down, but there's still definitely a bias to the left. And that was making this vehicle uncontrollable. It would actually explain why I was having issues off the launch. So one of the things that's interesting about this, the Pro, is you get this plate down the bottom which armors everything up. But the one thing I would like to do here is replace this arm and its double ball joints with just a single piece of plastic, flexible piece of plastic or something like that, and possibly swap the ball joints of the knuckle from being on the bottom here, as you can see it goes down the bottom there, and instead putting it on top. Now that does mean when it compresses like that it's going to be an extreme angle, but by doing so I actually get more steering angle, because the one thing that's actually limiting the steering angle at the moment is the ball head impacting the arm there. And that's really the only thing. It just means that at low speed you either have to throttle to spin the back out, or what other options do you really have? Yeah, you don't really have many other options. You can't steer tight enough. The turning circle on this is really, really bad. Usual dampening test. Yeah, so that's about it. There's really not a lot to it, and I guess no one's really asking any questions. This is an 85,000 kV R motor. Now the reason I dropped off this one was because I kept on getting the gear mesh incorrect and was stripping out these the gears there. Still not 100% sure why that was, but I suspect I had a stone or something in here that wasn't sitting properly. This chassis, while it does look like it is an outdoor or off-road chassis, really is not. There are some gaps around here. Oh, can I show that on camera? Yeah, there's some minor gaps around there, and right behind there is a gear. So if you get any sand going through there, and it is very easy to get sand into there, this picks up sand like crazy actually. It will actually start stripping and wearing out the gears very quickly. But there's a whole little gaps around the top here, and a stone can fling up and into there quite easily, or from the side. And if a stone gets caught in there, it will shred the gear almost immediately, as well as stones getting caught in the wheel well there and locking up one of the wheels. And there was one other place they get. Yes, under the suspension under here. And then the rear suspension just stops working. That one you don't notice so much, but when it locks up locks one of the wheels up, that's pretty immediate and can actually be quite difficult to get out. It does use one of the older steering setups, so I've been very tempted to pull this chassis and get rid of the servo block behind here and replace it with one of my normal servos. But then the electronics are going to be worthless, so I'd have to replace the ESC and I'd have to replace the receiver. And that may not actually be a big thing. Maybe I can actually do that, but getting everything to fit in here is going to be difficult. Like I can definitely get one of my Ensotech's ESCs there. It'll be questionable whether or not I can get one of the micro receivers in there. But who knows, maybe I'll be able to use a smaller motor in there, like one of the Ensotech's, and make that area smaller. One of the problems with the V8 Pro is with all this extra cabling. So ignore that I have the gyro there, but just this cabling. The body I've got, this one here, has a lot of trouble fitting. So there's not a lot of room for wiring with this body. Some of the other bodies have a bit more space, but it always seems to be a bit of a tight fit with this chassis. Atomic years ago had a dual layer carbon fiber chassis, which was a sheet of carbon fiber at the top and a sheet of carbon fiber at the bottom. I don't know if they ever actually released it. I never actually found any references to any place that sold it, but I've been playing around all of last year trying to work out how I can make that chassis and replicate it, and it's part of the inspiration behind having the electronics built into the chassis and replacing carbon fiber with PCB, and letting the PCB manufacturing houses actually worry about cutting everything up for me, so I didn't have to do it myself. So we'll see if anything comes of that. The big thing is the servo, but if I can just use an off-the-shelf micro servo, I don't think it'll be too much of an issue. The big thing will be the chassis itself is easy. The hard part's actually the front-end steering, and more importantly, where do I get that from, because I don't want to build that or design that myself. And once I've got that, how do I make everything element proof so that I don't have to worry about stones and such getting in there and destroying everything. Okay, so let's pop that out, do that. So I'm going to take a quick break and think. As I said, this was very much a spur of the moment. Oh wow, is it that late already? Spur of the moment chat or video. Yeah, let's do it that way. Okay. But yeah, definitely recommend the big. Or do I recommend the big bore shocks? Maybe I don't actually. Probably the normal shocks with grease. I think that's the trick, is using grease rather than the oil. But I'll report back to you on how that goes. So I expect to do a bit more Mini Z buggy stuff. I probably won't do that on camera just because I don't have enough room with the track. You really need a massive area. And if you have a look at the old Mini Z buggy videos on YouTube, especially the ones from 8 to 10 years ago, you'll find that a lot of the buggy videos are in outdoor areas or indoor tracks. They're not like in your kitchen or anything. And once you get one of these and you realize how bad the turning circle is, it all kind of clicks into place why that is. That hasn't clicked in yet, so if I... Wow, they did not make this easy to work on. I did pick up some PN racing tools as well. Kind of interesting. Very, very low, well, very, very high tolerance, which means it can be very, very difficult to get onto some things like the wheel nuts, and the hex bit is so tight in its tolerances, it can be really difficult to get them in. And honestly, I don't know if that's a good or a bad thing, but generally I've been pretty happy with the quality of the tools. I realise I haven't really covered tools much on any of my streams, but I hope to... Why is that not coming off? I've got a couple of things that I really, really like that I'll probably do a video on later this year, or maybe even later this month. So look forward to that. Okay, so let's come off now. And that gives us... There we go. The other problem I have with big bore shocks, and it's one of the reasons why I was looking at replacing them. So when I built the Techno MB-010 or the Kyosho, there is a known issue with the shocks actually bleeding in air. So every time they go up and down, they pick up a bit more air. If you've got two washers or two O-rings at the bottom of the shock, like the big bore shocks do, without a spacer in between them, with very, very tight tolerances, it can actually cause air to be sucked in. And I really, really, really suspect these shocks do suffer from that problem. So don't worry about the tightness of that later, but just make sure it moves. Yep, that's moving. Good. So we can move on to this. Sometimes I really forget how much of a time-consuming hobby this is. There we go. Now I need one more big bore shock, and where did I put it? I know I put it down here somewhere. There we go. So work out the direction we're going to put it. That's the other thing, all the parts on here have a specific direction they've got to go in. So I'm actually doing a lot of this off feel rather than sight. Okay. I'm kind of glad now that I did jump on and I did find out about that binding issue on the front right. That does explain a lot. And maybe there's hope for the steering setup and maybe it is fine and I don't need to replace it with a servo, but I think maybe with one of the other chassis I do want to convert it over to a full-blown non-Kyosho Electronics chassis, especially since between this and the Mini Z 4x4, they're the only ones I've got that are, I've done the same thing on here, they're the only ones that are FHSS, and the only reason I keep the Synchro Touch around, because as good as the default controller is, and do I have it here, as good as the KT531P is, or that one, the Synchro Touch is just a little bit better, especially when it comes to exponentials and that sort of thing, so definitely don't want to lose that. Alright, so you can see the shock is good and buried in the corner there. There we go. I forgot how stiff these big bore shocks are compared to the default. You can't really manhandle them because they don't have the flexibility of the smaller shocks with the thinner shock arms. I also find it funny that 3 people are probably sitting on here at the moment just laughing at me rambling, trying to get this all fit together. So actually, you know what I should be doing? I should be loosening up the shock. That should give me some more angle. But yeah, the Dakar truck is funny because it's actually my second attempt at designing a chassis. The redesigning the MB-010 was what I originally had hoped to start with, but hope to pick up some work on the Dakar truck actually in the next couple of weeks. I've got some time off, so should be able to focus on that shortly once I fix up all my computer hardware, because I had a lot of computer hardware break on me back to back, and it's taking quite a bit of effort to get that repaired. So I think 3 failed machines, 2 hard drives. Yeah, so doing a lot of work to get that fixed up. Now, I didn't take that out, so the wheel nut should still be captured in there. I'll move it forward because there's no reason not to. Okay. So that rear is not moving at all, which is actually a bad sign. So it means something's binding really, really, really bad. And I suspect it might just be the angle on the shock. So I'm going to finish up here. As I said, just a random ad hoc stream. I thought I might do some things, talk about the buggy, because not a lot of people talk about the buggy and there's not a lot of videos about the buggy at all. If you have questions, as usual, leave them below. I do like to answer those questions, and I try to answer them as soon as possible. So feel free to ask them, and I guess I'll see everyone else later. Keep on building in the meantime.